Daniel Ricciardo has made a grand return to the sport from Budapest onwards, but it seems like the Aussie is having it quite rough to figure out whether or not he's still made for this sport. Although it's a bit of a risky take, Ricciardo does seem like a liable option for the Austrian team, and at the age of 34, Red Bull might not actually want to continue the collaboration for the long term, because we all know what the common goal of the Honeybadger is: to retire in Red Bull alongside Verstappen. With Lawson showing what he's made of, as well as the last race being vastly dominated by Tsunoda when it comes to the Alpha Tauri drive-up, Ricciardo's statement has raised some questions in the F1 paddock, and one couldn't help but wonder, is it time that we get off Ricciardo's hype train? Daniel Ricciardo has completed a very promising return to the sport by signing with Alpha Tauri, and although this was understood to be the best move that the Aussie could have done in the past couple of years, there's a lot more behind it. For example, Ricciardo did deny to talk with teams like Haas and Williams back in 2022, mostly because he didn't feel like he wanted to drive for a back-marker team. But all of a sudden, his fortunes turned around, and just when he announced he's ready to take the longer path and sign with a team that could eventually lead to a Red Bull seat, he's done just that. Alpha Tauri have made a deal with Ricciardo for the remainder of the season right after he completed a very good tyre testing for Pirelli in Silverstone, with Horner stating that the results of Ricciardo are somewhere near Verstappen. Of course, there are lots of factors that we can take here, like the track temperature and conditions of the tyres, as well as the car setup, but Horner didn't waste any more time and decided that it's time to pull the plug on De Vries and replace him with Ricciardo. This is something that's been quite a common practice in Red Bull, as they've done the same to Gasly and Albon when they weren't able to pick up the pace, but still, De Vries being sacked after only 10 races and Ricciardo being the driver that Horner preferred for the replacement of the Dutchman speaks volumes about how much hope Red Bull had for the Aussie. And for some reason, it just feels like Ricciardo isn't that fit for the seat, with a combination of his driving skills as well as his car being definitely the worst on the grid, with just 10 points in the Constructors' Championship, 2 of which were scored by his replacement Liam Lawson, who drove 5 races and managed to finish P9. So what seems to be the issue with Ricciardo and his future with Red Bull? The Honeybadger is now the only driver on the grid to not have scored points in 2023, and even though he has the least races of all the drivers that have competed in this season, his consistency has been quite questionable in the races he's participated in so far. And after missing out on 5 races in a row, Ricciardo's return in Kota was everything he wouldn't hope for. In his return, Daniel finished dead last at P17, while his teammate was able to jump to P8 and grab the fastest lap in the last try in the race. Safe to say, Ricciardo was not impressed with how everything turned out for him, and after being able to outperform Tsunoda during the qualifying session, he failed to convert his good qualifying performance to a solid race event. This is something that he's opened up about and admitted that he's in a bit of a rusty form right now, and when talking about it, he said, "Texas hasn't been too kind. At the start, we were doing well with our plan, but the problem was once the cars with blue flags came up behind us, we lost too much. We seemed to struggle in traffic, and then we picked up some damage later on, so after that we lacked pace." But with Ricciardo being rumoured that he may have come a bit earlier in the sport after missing 5 races due to the hand injury, the result in Kota has only gone to worsen that to a further extent. Yes, he did have debris in the front wing, and it did ruin his chances to push, especially after he was P7 at a certain point of the race, and it did look like he could score points after all. But combined with the bad strategy of the race, everything turned south for Ricciardo, and to add salt to the wound, Tsunoda has scored the best lap and took extra points home for Alpha Tauri. Talking about his rustiness, Ricciardo went on to say, "I feel like I gave it the right amount of time to come back and feel confident with it, so the hand has not affected me this weekend. The sprint was better, and I hate saying this because I'm very experienced, but this year I am not very experienced, and there was a little bit of rust." Like, there were a few decisions on track where I was like, oh, I should know better, but it is learning for the Grand Prix. I apologised for another P11 because the kind of joke within the team is that someone is always qualifying P11. However, Ricciardo might not have all the time in the world to prove himself that he's worthy of the Red Bull seat, and there are some factors that we're going to talk about further in this video that put shade on his mission even more. Something with which Ricciardo can cope with is that the car was not in its optimal performing window, but being the only driver on the grid that hasn't scored points even though he raced on 5 events only has the potential to really take away the confidence with which he was so happy to enter the sport yet again. According to the technical director of Alpha Tauri, the race of the Aussie was more or less done when the debris was found in the front wing because the car lost a lot of aero, and the AT04 is already struggling with this part of the performance to a certain extent. When talking about this, Jody Eggington said, "Daniel's race was more difficult later on, but he also put in a very well-managed first stint, opening up strategy options for him. However, soon after his first stop, he picked up damage to brake duct parts, resulting in a significant loss of aero load and aero balance, meaning he was unable to run at the pace he was capable of and fell back into the chasing pack. Later on, we took the gamble to stop and try and resolve the issue in case of late race safety car. Although we improved the car balance at the stop, the race finished without incidents, providing no opportunity to move him forward." One thing that is definitely not going in Ricciardo's way is that Red Bull have all of a sudden taken a defensive stance on Perez's contract. And while he already knew that 2024 is out of the plays, with how Perez performed in the previous couple of races, it became evident that Red Bull might want to look into replacements, especially if Perez loses his second seat in the Drivers' Championship. And after Horner has denied all of the allegations regarding this matter, it turned out that Perez might actually be the favourite to keep his seat beyond 2025 as well, because for what we know, Marco's influence in Red Bull has been limited to a certain extent, and no matter how much he wants to throw dirt on Perez's name, Horner has been constantly defending his second driver and is likely to push towards this scenario to make sure it happens. And while Ricciardo might lose his opportunity to sign with Red Bull, he's also very likely to be under pressure for his current Alpha Tauri seat as well, because more likely than not, Liam Lawson is going to be considered as the primary candidate for Red Bull or their sister team in Alpha Tauri from 2025 onwards. Horner has openly talked about how Williams are not going to pursue Lawson for 1 year only, providing more evidence that Red Bull have massive plans for the Kiwi driver. And with how Tsunoda has been carrying the team on his back through 2023 so far, it seems like Ricciardo is the weakest link in Red Bull as we speak. The Austrian team will have a very difficult period ahead of itself, and more likely than not, it's going to result with a lot of trouble for Ricciardo. What do you think would be the viable solution for Red Bull regarding Ricciardo's future? Let us know in the comments below.